The footman was real to her. Until she saw the ring and everything collapsed. 1959. The October wind rattled the tall windows of Ashford Manor, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke from the gardener's pile near the east gate. Catherine Ashford pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the library, watching the grey clouds gather over the Hudson Valley. At 23, she was supposed to be planning her engagement to Richard Pemberton III, the textile heir her parents had been cultivating since her debutante ball. Instead, she found herself counting the hours until evening, when the staff would rotate shifts and she might catch another glimpse of him. Thomas appeared in the doorway precisely at 4 o'clock, as he had every day for the past 6 months. He carried the silver tea service with practiced ease, his dark hair just slightly too long for propriety, his shoulders broad beneath the formal livery that marked him as part of her family's household. He was nothing like the men her mother paraded through the drawing room. No inherited fortune, no Princeton diploma, no summer house in Newport. Just a young man from somewhere in Pennsylvania who'd come to work at the estate after his father's factory closed. "Your tea, Miss Ashford," he said, his voice low and careful, the way all the servants spoke in her mother's presence. "Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we share these stories with you." Catherine turned from the window, and their eyes met for just a moment that stretched like honey, thick with everything they couldn't say in the daylight hours of Ashford Manor. "Thank you, Thomas," she managed, her voice steadier than her hands as she reached for the cup. He set the tray on the mahogany side table, his movements economical and precise. But as he straightened, his fingers brushed against hers, deliberate and electric. Neither of them pulled away. "Your mother mentioned the Pemberton dinner party on Saturday," he said, loud enough for anyone passing in the hall to hear. Then quieter, "Will you walk tonight?" "The garden path," Catherine whispered, "after the house settles." He nodded once, a servant acknowledging an instruction, and left the room. Catherine sank into the leather armchair her grandfather had brought back from London, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was madness. This was everything her breeding and education had warned her against. This was the only real thing she'd felt in her entire carefully orchestrated life. Her mother found her there 20 minutes later, still holding the cold teacup. "Catherine, darling, you look flushed. Are you unwell?" Eleanor Ashford swept into the room in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and silk, her blonde hair perfectly set, her expression the practiced concern of a woman who'd spent 30 years managing her family's social standing like a military campaign. "Just tired, Mother. The weather's changing." Eleanor's sharp eyes took in every detail, the untouched tea, the way Catherine's fingers worried at the pearl bracelet on her wrist, the faint colour in her cheeks. "Well, you'll need your strength for Saturday. The Pembertons are bringing Richard's sister up from the city. Vanessa's quite the progressive, went to Vassar, works at some publishing house. Your father thinks it's unseemly, but the Pembertons tolerate it." She paused at the door. "Richard asked if you'd care to see the autumn foliage from his new Packard on Sunday. I told him you'd be delighted." "Mother, it's a beautiful car, Catherine. Pearl white with red leather interior. The kind of car a Pemberton wife would be driven in." The door clicked shut with the finality of a cell lock. Catherine waited until her mother's heels faded down the hallway before she stood and walked to the window again. Down below, she could see Thomas crossing the courtyard toward the carriage house, his breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. A Pemberton wife. The phrase sat in her stomach like lead. The truth was, she'd known Thomas for exactly 173 days. She'd started counting after their first real conversation, when she'd found him in the estate's greenhouse late one spring evening, carefully repotting her grandmother's collection of night-blooming jasmine. He thought he was alone and was humming something low and tuneless, his hands gentle with the delicate roots. She'd meant to slip away, but he'd turned and seen her, and instead of the formal deference the staff usually showed, he'd simply said, "They're incredible, aren't they? The way they wait all day just to open when no one's watching." They'd talked for 2 hours that night, about flowers and Pennsylvania coal country, and her childhood in Switzerland, and his sister who wanted to be a nurse, and her secret dream of studying architecture, and the way the world was changing faster than their parents could accept. By the time the greenhouse clock struck midnight, Catherine understood that she'd been sleepwalking through her life until that moment. Now, as November approached and her mother's campaign for the Pemberton match intensified, their stolen moments had become both necessary and dangerous. The household staff knew, she was certain of that. Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper, had given Catherine a long, measuring look last week when she'd come in from the garden with leaves in her hair. But the staff at Ashford Manor had their own complex code of loyalty and silence, refined over generations of keeping the family's secrets. That evening, Catherine waited until her parents retired to their separate bedrooms, a formality they'd maintained for 15 years, sleeping in adjoining suites connected by a door that never opened. She slipped out through the conservatory door, wrapped in her dark wool coat, her breath visible in the October cold. Thomas was waiting by the stone fountain, half hidden in shadow. He didn't speak, just held out his hand. They walked the gravel path that wound through the formal gardens, past the rose arbor and the reflecting pool, toward the wild section at the estate's edge, where the manicured lawns gave way to natural forest. "This can't continue," Catherine said finally, her voice breaking the silence between them. "I know." His hand tightened around hers. "My mother's planning the engagement announcement for Christmas. She's already chosen the photographer, the venue, even the design for the announcement card. And what do you want?" Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her, his features sharp in the moonlight filtering through the bare branches above them. "I want—" Catherine's throat closed around the truth. What she wanted was impossible. To choose Thomas would mean losing everything: her family, her inheritance, her place in the only world she'd ever known. The Ashfords didn't marry servants. They didn't even marry middle class. Her grandfather had nearly disowned her Aunt Helen for marrying a doctor. But to choose Richard Pemberton meant losing herself, becoming another pearl-wearing, charity luncheon-attending, properly smiling ghost of a woman, counting out her days in the prison of respectability. "I want this to be different than it is," she whispered finally. "I want to live in a world where loving you doesn't mean destroying everything I know." "Then we run." Thomas said it simply, as if he'd been planning it for months. "Tomorrow, we take the train to Albany, then Chicago. I have money saved, not much, but enough to start. I'll find work. You could study architecture like you talked about. We could—" "Thomas, stop." Catherine pulled her hand from his, suddenly cold. "Run where? To what? You'd lose your position, your reference. I'd lose my family, my entire life. We'd be cut off, penniless, and for what? So we can pretend that love is enough to live on." It could be enough. But even as he said it, she could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew the reality as well as she did. In 1959, in their world, some lines simply couldn't be crossed without consequences that would follow them forever. They stood in the darkness, the gulf between them widening with every second of silence. Finally, Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A pressed flower, jasmine from the greenhouse, carefully preserved. "I picked this the night we met," he said, placing it in her palm. I thought maybe it could mean something, that we could mean something." Catherine closed her fingers around the fragile petals. "We do mean something. That's what makes this impossible." She turned and walked back toward the house before he could see her crying. Behind her, she heard Thomas's footsteps on the gravel, heading in the opposite direction toward the servants' quarters and the separate life they were meant to live. Back in her bedroom, Catherine stood at the window and watched the carriage house lights go dark, one by one. Tomorrow she would have tea with her mother and discuss floral arrangements for the Pemberton dinner party. She would smile at Richard and pretend interest in his stories about the textile business. She would become who she was supposed to be. But tonight, she allowed herself to hold the pressed jasmine and imagine a different world, one where love could be enough, one where the distance between the main house and the servants' quarters wasn't an unbridgeable ocean, one where she could choose the life she wanted instead of the life she'd been given. The next morning arrived cold and bright, frost painting patterns on the window panes. Catherine, dressed in her navy wool suit, appropriate for lunch with her mother and the Pemberton women, and went down to breakfast feeling hollow. Her father was already at the table, hidden behind the Wall Street Journal, making small, disapproving noises at whatever economic news he was reading. "Good morning, Father." Harrison Ashford lowered the paper just enough to peer at her over his reading glasses. "Your mother tells me you've been spending time in the library. I hope you're not filling your head with too much modern nonsense. The Pembertons value tradition." "I'm reading Edith Wharton, Father. Hardly modern." "Age of Innocence?" He snorted. "Your mother banned that book from this house when it came out. All that business about marriages and propriety gave young women ideas." He returned to his paper, the conversation apparently concluded. Catherine picked at her eggs, her appetite gone. Through the dining room window, she could see Thomas directing the younger groundskeepers in their work, preparing the gardens for winter. He moved with quiet authority, respected by the men who worked under him despite his youth. He'd mentioned once that his father had been a union organizer before the factory closed. Leadership, he'd said, wasn't about where you were born. It was about whether people trusted you to see them clearly. "Miss Ashford?" Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Your mother asked me to remind you that the car will be ready at 11 for your luncheon in the city." "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan." The housekeeper lingered for a moment, then said quietly, "Miss, might I have a word after breakfast?" Catherine's father didn't look up from his paper, and she nodded, her heart suddenly racing. In the hallway, away from her father's hearing, Mrs. Brennan's expression softened slightly. "I've been with this family for 28 years, the older woman said. "I watched you grow up, saw you through your mother's expectations and your grandmother's illness. So I'm going to speak plainly, which I hope you'll forgive. Please, whatever you're feeling for young Thomas, it needs to end, not because there's anything wrong with him. He's a good man, works hard, treats the staff with respect. But this world," she gestured around them at the marble floors, the ancestral portraits, the crystal chandelier, "it doesn't bend for people like us, or people like him. It breaks them instead." "What if I don't want to live in this world anymore?" Mrs. Brennan's laugh was bitter. "Child, you think you'd be leaving it. You'd just be living in it differently, from the outside, looking in, remembering what you'd lost. And Thomas would be right there beside you, watching you realize what you'd given up for him. That kind of weight breaks even the strongest love." "So I should just, what, marry Richard Pemberton and pretend to be happy?" "I'm saying you should think very carefully about what you can actually live with. Because in my experience, the romantic choice and the right choice aren't always the same thing." Mrs. Brennan paused. "Your mother's asked me to inventory the silver today. She's planning a formal dinner after Christmas. An engagement announcement, I'd guess. If you're going to make a different choice, Miss Catherine, you'd best make it soon." The luncheon was exactly as unbearable as Catherine had anticipated. Her mother and Vanessa Pemberton discussed the latest fashions from Paris, while Catherine pushed Dover sole around her plate and smiled at appropriate intervals. Vanessa was actually quite interesting. She worked at a small literary agency and had opinions about Kerouac and Ginsberg that would have scandalized Catherine's mother if she'd been paying attention. But Eleanor Ashford was too focused on securing the match to notice that her future daughter-in-law's sister was something of a rebel. "You know," Vanessa said as they waited for dessert, "Richard's a good man, but he's also frighteningly conventional. I tell him he should travel, see the world, maybe read something published after 1920, but he's very much a Pemberton, duty, tradition, appropriate behavior." She studied Catherine over her water glass. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you love him?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Catherine's carefully maintained composure. Her mother, deep in conversation with Richard's mother about table linens, didn't hear. I'm not sure I know what that means," Catherine said finally. "Fair answer." Vanessa leaned back. "My brother will give you a comfortable life. Security, respectability, all the things our parents' generation values. But if you're looking for passion or partnership or any kind of real intimacy, well, Richard learned very young to keep his feelings locked up tight. Our father trained it out of him." She paused. "I guess I'm saying, be sure you know what you're choosing. Because once you're a Pemberton wife, the expectations are pretty ironclad." That evening, back at Ashford Manor, Catherine found a note slipped under her bedroom door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, not Thomas's careful script. "The greenhouse, 9 p.m, please come. T." But when she arrived, breathless and anxious, she found not Thomas, but his younger sister Mary, waiting among the jasmine plants. The girl was about 19, wearing a simple dress and cardigan, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Miss Ashford," Mary said, standing up quickly, her hands twisting nervously. "I'm sorry for the deception. Thomas doesn't know I'm here. But I had to talk to you. Is he all right? Did something happen?" "No, he's fine, physically." Mary took a breath. "Miss Ashford, I know about you and my brother. He doesn't talk about it, but I know him better than anyone. I can see what this is doing to him." Catherine sank onto the gardening bench, suddenly exhausted. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand what you're asking him to do. If you run away together, Thomas loses everything he's worked for. His position here, his references, any chance of advancement. We grew up poor, Miss Ashford. Our father died in a mining accident when I was 12. Our mother worked herself to death in a laundry just to keep us fed. Thomas got this position through pure determination and luck, and it's the foundation for everything he's building. For himself, for me, for the future he's planning. I know that. I would never... But if you don't run, if you marry this Pemberton man, Thomas will have to watch you every day, serve tea to you and your husband, stand in the background at your dinner parties, pretend you're nothing to him while his heart breaks in silence. He'll do it, because that's who he is. But it'll destroy him just as surely as running would." Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Mary's expression softened slightly. "I don't know, Miss Ashford. I truly don't. I just needed you to understand that there's no clean answer here. Whatever you choose, someone pays a price. I wanted you to know what that price would be for Thomas, what it would cost him to love you either way." After Mary left, Catherine sat alone in the greenhouse for a long time, surrounded by the night-blooming jasmine that had brought her and Thomas together. The flowers were closed tight, waiting for darkness to fully fall before they'd release their scent. She understood now why her grandmother had loved them. There was something honest about her beauty that only revealed itself when no one important was watching. She was still there when Thomas found her, just after 10 o'clock. He stood in the doorway, his expression wary. "Mary told me she came to see you. I'm sorry, she shouldn't have." "She was right to." Catherine stood up, facing him across the greenhouse. "Thomas, I need you to tell me the truth. If we ran away together, if we tried to build a life somewhere else, would you resent me, eventually? Would you wake up one morning and realize what you'd given up and wish you'd chosen differently? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said finally. I'd like to think love would be enough, but I've seen what poverty does to people, how it grinds them down. My mother loved my father desperately, but by the end I could see in her eyes that she was just tired. Tired of struggling, tired of watching her children go hungry, tired of loving someone who couldn't protect her from the hardness of the world. He met her eyes. I won't do that to you, Catherine. I won't ask you to trade your life for a struggle I can't guarantee we'd survive. Then what do we do? I think, his voice broke, I think we have to let each other go cleanly before we destroy each other trying to make this work. Catherine felt something inside her crack wide open. How? How do I just stop loving you? You don't. Thomas crossed the greenhouse and took her hands. You just love me enough to let me go, to choose the life that makes sense, even if it breaks your heart. And I do the same. They stood there, hands clasped, the jasmine beginning to open around them, releasing its heartbreaking scent into the night air. This was goodbye. They both knew it. Tomorrow, Catherine would go back to planning her future with Richard Pemberton. Thomas would go back to being a servant in her household, and the distance between them would become final. I'll never forget you, Catherine whispered. I'll never forget you either. But that's all we get to keep. He kissed her once, softly, with the tenderness of something ending rather than beginning. Then he let her go and walked out of the greenhouse, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Catherine stayed among the jasmine until dawn began to break, breathing in the fading scent, memorizing the way grief felt so she'd never make the mistake of confusing comfort with love. When she finally returned to the house, her decision was made. She would marry Richard Pemberton. She would become the person her family needed her to be, and she would lock away this autumn of stolen moments like a pressed flower, beautiful, fragile, and ultimately belonging to the past. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she saw Mrs. Brennan in the hallway, watching her with an expression Catherine couldn't quite read. The housekeeper was holding something, a telegram, it looked like. And in that moment, before Mrs. Brennan spoke, Catherine felt the future shift again, like a door swinging open when she'd thought all the doors were closed. Miss Catherine, Mrs. Brennan said quietly, this just arrived. It's marked urgent. Catherine took the telegram with trembling hands. The return address was from a law firm in Philadelphia. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words once, twice, trying to make sense of what they said. The words swam before her eyes. Urgent stop regarding Thomas Coleman. Estate matter. Stop, please confirm current whereabouts. Stop matter of inheritance. Requires immediate attention. Stop. What on earth? Catherine looked up at Mrs. Brennan, confused. Why would a telegram about Thomas come here? To me? Mrs. Brennan's expression was carefully neutral. Perhaps because you're the only member of the household he's been seen speaking with regularly. The staff notices these things, Miss Catherine, but something in the older woman's eyes suggested she knew more than she was saying. Catherine looked down at the telegram again, her mind racing. An estate matter. Thomas had never mentioned any family beyond his mother and sister, both of whom he'd described as working class, struggling to make ends meet after his father's death. I need to speak with him, Catherine said. He's in the carriage house. But Miss Catherine, your mother is expecting you for breakfast in 20 minutes. If you're late, she'll ask questions. Catherine was already moving toward the stairs. Tell her I'm unwell. Tell her anything. But I need to speak with Thomas first. She found him in the small office attached to the carriage house, reviewing inventory sheets for the upcoming winter preparations. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his face. Catherine, what? She handed him the telegram without a word. She watched his face as he read it, saw the color drain from his cheeks, saw his hands begin to shake slightly. "Thomas," she said softly, "what is this about?" He set the telegram down carefully, as if it might explode if handled roughly. "I need to tell you something I should have told you from the beginning." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down." Catherine sat, her heart hammering. She'd thought they'd said their goodbye last night in the greenhouse. She'd thought the hardest part was over. "My name isn't really Thomas Coleman," he said finally. "Well, it is, but it's not the full picture. My full name is Thomas Coleman Hartwell." The name Hartwell hit her like a physical blow. The Hartwells were one of Philadelphia's oldest families, steel money going back 3 generations. They owned half the factories in Pennsylvania, had politicians in their pocket, moved in the same social circles as the Ashfords and Pembertons. "I don't understand," Catherine whispered. "My father, my real father, was Jonathan Hartwell's younger brother, Edward. He was the black sheep of the family, the one who believed workers deserved fair wages and safe conditions. He became a union organizer, which the family considered an unforgivable betrayal. They cut him off completely when he married my mother, who was a seamstress in one of their factories." Thomas's voice was flat, reciting facts. "He died in a mining accident when I was 14, trying to organize the workers there. The family refused to acknowledge us at his funeral. But then why am I here working as a footman?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Because my Uncle Jonathan just died. And apparently, despite all the years of silence, he left me a substantial inheritance. His lawyers have been trying to find me for 6 months. I've been using my mother's maiden name, Coleman, because I wanted nothing to do with the Hartwell money. It's built on the backs of people like my mother, people who died young from overwork just to make men like my uncle richer." Catherine felt the room spinning. 6 months? You've known for 6 months that you had an inheritance coming? No? He met her eyes. "I've been hiding from it for 6 months. I didn't want it then, and I don't want it now. That money represents everything I hate about this world, the way wealth gets hoarded, the way the rich protect their own while everyone else struggles. I came to work here because I wanted to build something on my own terms, without the family name or the blood money. But this changes everything." Catherine stood up, her mind racing. "Don't you see? You're not just a servant. You're a Hartwell. My parents would what?" Thomas stood too, his voice sharp. "Would suddenly decide I'm worthy of their daughter. Would welcome me into the family because I have money now, even though I'm the same person I was yesterday." He shook his head. "That's exactly why I didn't want you to know, because I didn't want our relationship to be about money or status or what I could become in their eyes. I wanted it to be real." "It was real." Catherine grabbed his arm. "It is real. But Thomas, this means we could be together. We wouldn't have to run away and struggle. We could what? Take the blood money and pretend I didn't spend my entire childhood watching what the Hartwell fortune did to people like my mother? Catherine, if I accept that inheritance, I become part of the system that killed my father. I become everything he fought against." They stared at each other across the small office, and Catherine felt a new kind of pain opening in her chest. Last night, they'd been divided by class and circumstance, things outside their control. Now, they were divided by choice, by Thomas's principles and her pragmatism, by the question of whether some money was too tainted to touch, even if it could buy them a future together. "What if—" Catherine's voice was trembling. "What if we took the money and used it differently? Used it to help people, the way your father would have wanted? Built something good out of something corrupt?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I've thought about that," he admitted. "God knows I've thought about it. But every time I imagine taking that inheritance, I see my mother's face, see the way she looked at my uncle at my father's funeral, like he was a murderer who just happened to wear expensive suits. How do I honor her memory while living on the money that worked her to death? By building the world she wanted for you, Catherine said urgently. Thomas, your mother didn't want you to suffer the way she did. That's why she worked so hard. Not so you could martyr yourself by refusing help, but so you could have a better life. Maybe this inheritance, maybe it's the universe's way of giving her what she wanted. A chance for her son to live without that grinding poverty she knew. He looked at her, and she could see the war in his eyes. The pull between his principles and his love, between honoring the dead and living for the future. I need time, he said finally. I need to think about this, about what it means, what I can live with. How much time? The lawyers need an answer within 30 days, or the money goes to the Pennsylvania Historical Society. He managed a weak smile. My uncle's idea of a joke, I think, giving me a month to decide whether to betray everything my father stood for. Catherine wanted to argue, to make him see that accepting the inheritance wasn't betrayal, it was opportunity. But she could see in his face that pushing now would only drive him further into his corner. 30 days, she repeated. And after that? After that, whatever happens, at least we'll know. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. No more secrets, no more hiding, just the truth of who we are and what we can live with. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, the telegram sitting on the desk between them like a loaded gun. A knock on the door broke them apart. Mrs. Brennan stood in the doorway, her expression urgent. Miss Catherine, your mother is asking for you. She's in the morning room with Mrs. Pemberton. They've moved the engagement announcement up. They're planning it for this Saturday's dinner instead of Christmas. The housekeeper's eyes moved between them. I thought you should know, before you face her. Catherine felt the world tilting. Saturday, 3 days away. 3 days before her mother publicly committed her to Richard Pemberton, before the announcement went out in the society pages, before the weight of family expectation became impossible to escape. She looked at Thomas, saw the same calculation in his eyes. 30 days suddenly felt like a lifetime they didn't have. Thank you, Mrs. Brennan, she managed. To Thomas, we'll talk tonight, after dinner, the greenhouse. He nodded, and she left, her mind spinning with impossible choices and narrowing timelines. In the hallway, she caught her reflection in one of the gilt-framed mirrors. She looked pale, wild-eyed, nothing like the composed Ashford daughter who'd gone to lunch yesterday. She took a breath, smoothed her hair, arranged her face into the mask of polite interest her mother expected. In the morning room, Eleanor Ashford and Patricia Pemberton sat reviewing floral arrangements for Saturday's dinner, their heads bent together in conspiratorial planning. They looked up when Catherine entered, twin smiles of satisfaction on their faces. There you are, darling, her mother said. We've had the most wonderful morning. Patricia and I have been finalizing the details for your engagement announcement. The Havertons will be there, and the Montgomerys, and of course Senator Blackwell and his wife. We're thinking white roses with touches of ivy. Very classical, very appropriate. Mother, I haven't said yes yet. The words came out before Catherine could stop them. The room went silent. Patricia Pemberton's smile froze. Eleanor Ashford's eyes went sharp and dangerous. I'm sorry, her mother said, her voice like ice. What did you just say? I said Richard hasn't formally proposed. We've been spending time together, but there's been no actual proposal. Catherine Marie Ashford. Her mother stood up, dismissing Patricia with a slight gesture. The older woman gathered her things and left with practiced discretion, closing the door behind her. What is going on with you? You've been distracted for months, disappearing at odd hours, pale and distant at meals. Now you're talking nonsense about proposals when you know perfectly well what's been arranged. Arranged, exactly. Catherine felt something hardening in her chest. "You've arranged everything, Mother. My clothes, my schedule, my future, but you can't arrange my heart." "Your heart?" Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Catherine, do you think I married your father for love? Do you think any woman in our position has that luxury? We marry for family, for security, for maintaining what we have. Love, if it comes at all, comes later, if we're lucky." "And were you lucky?" Her mother's face went very still. "That's not relevant to this discussion." "It's completely relevant. You're asking me to make the same choice you made, to marry a good man I don't love, to spend my life in a beautiful prison, counting out my days in charity luncheons and society dinners. Did that make you happy, Mother? Truly?" Eleanor Ashford walked to the window, her back to Catherine. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "Happiness is a luxury, Catherine. Security is a necessity. I've given you a life where you'll never know the fear of poverty, never have to worry about where your next meal comes from, never have to compromise your dignity for survival. The Pemberton match ensures that continues. Whatever romantic notions you're entertaining, they're fantasies. Real life requires different choices." "What if I don't want the life you've given me?" Her mother turned, and Catherine saw something raw in her face. Fear, perhaps, or grief for dreams long abandoned. "Then you'll learn, as I did, that wanting something different doesn't make it possible. The world doesn't bend for us, Catherine. We bend for it, or we break." She paused. "I'm announcing your engagement on Saturday. If you care about this family, about the Ashford name, about everything your grandfather built, you'll be there. You'll smile. You'll accept Richard's proposal. And you'll step into the role you were born for." She left the room, her silk dress rustling, leaving Catherine standing alone among the floral arrangement samples and society newspapers marking the fall social calendar. That afternoon, Catherine did something she'd never done before. She left the estate grounds without permission, taking her bicycle down the private road toward town. She needed space to think, needed to be away from the suffocating expectations and watching eyes. The town of Millbrook was small and sleepy, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. Catherine stopped at the public library, a modest brick building on Main Street, and asked the librarian for newspapers from Philadelphia. "Researching something, Miss Ashford?" the librarian asked, her eyes curious. "A school project," Catherine lied smoothly. "Local history." She spent 2 hours reading everything she could find about the Hartwell family. Jonathan Hartwell's obituary described him as a captain of industry and philanthropist, but the union newsletter she found tucked in the local history section told a different story. Strikes broken with hired violence, workers fired for organizing, safety violations covered up. But she also found articles about Edward Hartwell, Thomas's father, his efforts to improve working conditions, his speeches about fair wages, the accident that had killed him when a mine collapsed, a mine that had been cited for safety violations the Hartwell Company had lobbied to ignore. The picture that emerged was complicated and tragic. Thomas wasn't wrong about the source of his inheritance, but he also wasn't wrong to want a different life than the one his parents had endured. As the library was closing, Catherine noticed a small newspaper clipping from 5 years ago, an article about a workers' memorial fund established in Edward Hartwell's name. The fund provided scholarships for the children of factory workers to attend college. It had been established anonymously, but Catherine had a sudden, certain intuition about who had created it. She found Thomas that evening in the greenhouse again, tending the jasmine plants with methodical care. He looked up when she entered, his expression wary. "I went to town today," she said without preamble, "read about your family, your father, your uncle. And I understand why you hate the money. But I also found something else. That Workers' Memorial Scholarship, that was you, wasn't it? You've been sending money to it from your wages here." Thomas's hand stilled on the plant he was repotting. "How did you—" Because it's exactly what someone who truly cared about honoring their father would do, not rejecting help out of pride, but using what little you have to help others. She moved closer. "Thomas, what if the inheritance is the same thing, just on a larger scale? What if this is your chance to do real good, to build something that your father would actually be proud of? Or what if it corrupts me?" His voice was raw. "What if I take that money and it changes who I am, turns me into another wealthy man who thinks he knows what's best for the poor while never actually living among them? Then I'll remind you." Catherine took his hands, dirty from the soil. "I'll be there to keep you honest, to make sure you never forget where you came from or what your father fought for. That's what partnership means, Thomas. Two people holding each other accountable to be better than they'd be alone." He looked at her, and she could see the longing in his face, the desire to believe her, to take the chance she was offering. But there was something else there too, something he wasn't saying. "What?" she pressed. "What aren't you telling me?" Thomas pulled away, pacing to the far end of the greenhouse. "There's a condition to the inheritance, something the lawyers mentioned when they finally tracked me down." Catherine's heart sank. "What condition?" "My uncle, he was a bastard, but he was a smart bastard. He knew I might reject the money on principle, so he structured the inheritance as a trust. I can't just take it and do whatever I want. There are stipulations." "What kind of stipulations?" "I have to marry within 2 years, to someone from an appropriate family," his lawyer's words. "Someone who understands the social responsibilities that come with the Hartwell name." Thomas turned to face her, and she saw the bitter irony in his expression. "Don't you see? Even accepting the inheritance means accepting their world, their rules, their definitions of what's appropriate, including who I'm allowed to love." Catherine felt something cold settle in her stomach. "But I'm from an appropriate family. The Ashfords are exactly the kind of—" "You're engaged to Richard Pemberton, or you will be, in 3 days. And even if you weren't, even if you broke that engagement and chose me, what would that look like? Me, the suddenly wealthy Hartwell heir, sweeping you away from your previous engagement? We'd be the scandal of the season. Your parents would be humiliated. The Pembertons would consider it a social betrayal. And we'd spend the rest of our lives being whispered about as the couple who broke every rule for money and desire." "So, what are you saying? That we can't be together no matter what happens? That even if you accept the inheritance, we're trapped?" Thomas came back to her, cupped her face in his hands. "I'm saying that every path forward is complicated. Accepting the money doesn't magically fix everything. It just creates different problems. And I need to know if you're willing to face those problems with me. Not just the romantic idea of us, but the messy reality." Catherine leaned into his touch, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. 3 days, she said. "I have 3 days until my mother announces my engagement. You have 30 days until you have to decide about the inheritance. Maybe we can find a way forward in that time, something that honors both of our values. Or maybe we're just delaying the inevitable. Maybe. But I'd rather try and fail than never try at all." They stood there in the greenhouse, the night-blooming jasmine beginning to open around them, filling the air with sweetness and sorrow. Outside, Catherine could hear the dinner bell ringing, calling the household to their evening meal. Soon, she'd have to go back to the main house, sit at her family's table, and pretend that her world wasn't fracturing. But for now, she stayed in Thomas's arms, breathing in jasmine and possibility, and tried to believe that love might actually be enough to build a future on. The next morning, Catherine woke to find a note slipped under her door. Not from Thomas this time, but from Vanessa Pemberton. "Meet me at the Riverside Cafe in town, 10 a.m. Come alone. Trust me." Catherine arrived at the cafe to find Vanessa already seated in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee waiting. The younger woman looked serious, her usual playful expression replaced by something more determined. "Thank you for coming," Vanessa said as Catherine slid into the booth. "I needed to talk to you away from our mothers and their ridiculous engagement plans." "How did you know I'd come?" "Because I saw your face at lunch the other day when I asked if you loved Richard. You looked like a trapped animal." Vanessa pushed one of the coffee cups across the table. "Look, I like you, Catherine. You're smart, you have actual thoughts in your head, and you're wasted on my brother, so I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't do. I'm going to help you." "Help me how?" Vanessa leaned forward. "I know about Thomas Coleman. Or should I say, Thomas Hartwell." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "How?" "Please. I work in publishing. We research people for a living. When I saw you looking miserable about this engagement, I did some digging on the staff at Ashford Manor. Found it curious that you had a new footman who happened to be from a prominent Philadelphia family, working under an assumed name. Made me wonder what else might be going on." "Are you going to tell our families?" "God, no. What do I care who you're in love with? But I am going to tell you something about my brother that you should know before you make any decisions." Vanessa paused. "Richard is gay, Catherine." The words hung in the air between them. Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it, trying to process this information. He's what? Gay, homosexual, whatever term you want to use. He's been in love with his business partner, Charles, for 3 years. They have an apartment together in the city that my parents think is just for work. Our father has suspected for a while, which is why he's so desperate to marry Richard off to a nice society girl. Make him look respectable, give him the cover he needs to continue his actual life in private. Catherine set down her coffee cup, her hands shaking. "Does Richard know you know?" "Of course. We're actually quite close. He's the one who helped me come out to our parents as bisexual, though they pretend that conversation never happened." Vanessa's smile was sad. The Pembertons are very good at pretending inconvenient truths don't exist. "So this whole engagement is a sham. Oh, Richard would go through with it. He's dutiful enough to trap you both in a marriage of convenience, if that's what the families want. You'd have separate bedrooms, separate lives. He'd give you children eventually because that's what's expected. And you'd spend the rest of your life married to a man who could never love you the way you deserve." Vanessa reached across the table. "But it doesn't have to be that way. There's another option." "What option?" "You call off the engagement. Sight, cold feet, incompatibility, whatever you want. Take the social hit now instead of living a lie forever. Meanwhile, your Thomas accepts his inheritance, establishes himself as a legitimate member of Philadelphia society. He courts you properly, the way the families expect. It takes longer, it's less romantic, but in 6 months or a year, when the gossip has died down, you could actually be together, openly, with your family's eventual acceptance, or at least their tolerance." Catherine stared at her. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple. It's strategic. There's a difference." Vanessa pulled out a newspaper clipping. "I also did some research on the Hartwell inheritance. The marriage requirement, it's actually quite flexible. Thomas just needs to marry someone from an established family within 2 years. Nowhere does it say he can't be engaged to someone else first, or that the woman can't have had previous romantic entanglements. The trustees just want respectability, not perfection. But the scandal will be a 2-day wonder, I promise you. Someone will get pregnant out of wedlock or get caught with their secretary, and everyone will forget about you breaking an engagement that was barely official anyway. Society has a short memory when there's fresh gossip to consume." Catherine felt hope flickering in her chest, dangerous and bright. "Why are you helping me? Why risk your brother's arrangement? Because Richard deserves better than a fake marriage, and so do you. Because I'm tired of watching people sacrifice their happiness to maintain appearances. And because—" Vanessa hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to love someone your family doesn't approve of. I know what it costs to hide who you really are. If I can help someone else avoid that fate, I will." They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's warmth a small bubble of possibility against the cold November morning outside. "There's one more thing you should know," Vanessa said. "I spoke with Thomas yesterday, showed up at the estate and asked to speak with him directly, told him I was a friend of yours. He's a good man, Catherine, but he's terrified of disappointing you, of not being enough once the novelty of forbidden romance wears off. He thinks you'll wake up one day and regret choosing him over the life you could have had." "That's not true." "Then you need to prove it to him, and to yourself." Vanessa stood up. "The engagement announcement is tomorrow night. You have until then to decide what kind of life you want to live. Choose wisely." She left money on the table and walked out, leaving Catherine alone with her coffee and the weight of an impossible decision that suddenly felt a little less impossible. That evening, Catherine requested a private meeting with her father in his study, something she'd never done before. Harrison Ashford looked up from his paperwork, surprised but not displeased. "Catherine, come in, sit down. What's on your mind?" She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, gathering her courage. "Father, I need to tell you something about the engagement to Richard Pemberton." His expression grew wary. "Your mother said you were being difficult about the announcement. Catherine, we've been through this. The Pemberton match is—" "Father, please, just listen." She took a breath. "I can't marry Richard because I don't love him, and more importantly, I love someone else." Harrison Ashford set down his pen very carefully. "Someone else. I see. And who is this person?" "His name is Thomas Hartwell. He's been working here as a footman, but he's actually the nephew of Jonathan Hartwell of Philadelphia. He's set to inherit a substantial portion of the Hartwell estate." Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Jonathan Hartwell's nephew. That would be Edward's son, the union organizer who died in that mining accident. "You knew about him?" "Your grandfather and Jonathan Hartwell did business together for 20 years. I knew he had a brother who'd gone rogue, married beneath his station, got himself killed trying to organize workers. Caused quite a scandal at the time." He turned back to face her. "And this young man, he's been working here in our house for how long?" 6 months. 6 months. "And you've developed feelings for him during that time?" "Yes." Harrison Ashford studied her face, and Catherine saw something unexpected there. Not anger, but a kind of weary recognition. "Your mother and I have been married for 28 years, he said finally. "I've given her everything she could want. Security, status, a beautiful home. But I've never once seen her look at me the way you're looking right now when you talk about this young man." Catherine felt tears prickling her eyes. "Father, I'm not saying I approve. I'm not even saying I understand. But I am saying that I recognize that look. It's the same look I saw on your grandmother's face in her wedding portrait before she married your grandfather in an arrangement much like what we're planning for you. She told me once, near the end, that she'd been in love with someone else, a doctor, but her family needed the Ashford alliance, so she did her duty." He paused. "She was a good wife to your grandfather, but I never saw her truly happy. Not once." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if this Thomas Hartwell is who you say he is, if he has the inheritance and the family name, then perhaps there's room for negotiation. The Pembertons won't be pleased, but they'll recover. They always do. And if he's a Hartwell, he's not entirely inappropriate, even if his father made questionable choices." Catherine stood up, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're saying you wouldn't oppose it?" "I'm saying I won't force you into a loveless marriage if there's a viable alternative. But Catherine, his voice grew stern. This young man needs to prove himself. He needs to accept that inheritance, establish himself properly in society, court you the right way. No more sneaking around, no more romance in greenhouses. If he wants my daughter, he needs to earn the right to her. Properly. He will. I know he will. Her father nodded. Then you need to talk to him. And you need to call off the Pemberton arrangement before your mother makes a public announcement that will be embarrassing for everyone involved. Catherine crossed the room and hugged her father, something she hadn't done since she was a child. He patted her shoulder awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the display of emotion, but not pulling away. Thank you, Father. Thank your grandmother. If she was still alive, she'd be the one pushing you to follow your heart. I'm just trying to honor her memory. He stepped back, resuming his formal posture. Now go. You have a lot to do before tomorrow evening. Catherine found Thomas in his small room above the carriage house that served as his quarters. She knocked softly, and when he opened the door, she saw the surprise on his face turn to concern. Catherine, you shouldn't be here. If anyone sees, I don't care anymore. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I just spoke with my father. Thomas, he knows about us, about you, about the inheritance, and he's not opposed. Thomas sank onto the edge of his narrow bed, looking stunned. He's not opposed. He says if you accept the inheritance and court me properly the right way, he won't stand in our way. We'd have to do it correctly, no more hiding, everything above board. But Thomas, it means we could actually be together, really together. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. And the engagement announcement tomorrow? I'm calling it off. Tonight. I'm going to talk to Richard myself. Explain the situation. Vanessa says he'll understand. She knelt in front of him, taking his hands. Thomas, this is our chance. This is the door opening. But you have to walk through it with me. You have to accept the inheritance. Catherine, I know what it costs you. I know what it means. But we can use that money for good. The way you've always wanted. Build something that honors your father's memory. Create opportunities for people like your mother. Make the Hartwell name mean something different than it did when your uncle was alive. She squeezed his hands. Please, don't let pride or principle rob us of the future we could have. Thomas looked at her and she saw the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crack. If I do this, if I accept the money and the name and all that comes with it, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if I ever start to become like them, like my uncle, like the men who value money over people, you'll tell me. You'll pull me back. You'll remind me who I'm supposed to be. I promise. Every single day if I have to. He pulled her up onto the bed beside him, wrapping his arms around her. They sat there in the dim light of his small room, holding each other while the impossible future became just barely possible. I'll contact the lawyers tomorrow, he said quietly. Accept the inheritance. Start the process. It'll take a few weeks to finalize, but once it does, I'll come to your father properly. Ask for permission to court you the right way. And in the meantime, you survived the scandal of breaking your engagement. And I survive being the Hartwell heir everyone's going to be gossiping about. He managed a small smile. We've faced harder things than gossip. Catherine left his room as the dinner bell rang, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had one more difficult conversation ahead of her, but after that, the path forward would be clear. She found Richard Pemberton in the drawing room before dinner, reviewing some business papers. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set the documents aside. Catherine, you look serious. Should I be worried? Richard, I need to talk to you about tomorrow's announcement. He studied her face, then gestured to the sofa across from him. I had a feeling this conversation was coming. My sister spoke with you, didn't she? She did. Richard, I'm so sorry, but I can't marry you. I don't love you and you don't love me, and we both deserve better than a marriage of convenience." To her surprise, Richard's expression was one of relief rather than anger. "Thank God. I was dreading having to go through with this farce." He ran a hand through his hair. "Catherine, you're a lovely person, but you're absolutely right. We'd make each other miserable. I'd be a terrible husband to you. Vanessa told me about Charles." "Of course she did." He smiled. "My sister never could keep a secret, but yes, Charles is, well, he's everything to me. And the thought of having to hide that forever, to trap you in a marriage that would be a lie for both of us, it's been keeping me up at night. So we're agreed? We tell our families tonight before the announcement tomorrow?" "We are, though I should warn you, my mother is going to be devastated. She's already ordered the engagement gift, a rather extravagant sapphire ring that's been in the Pemberton family for 3 generations. She was planning to present it tomorrow night as a surprise." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. "A ring?" "Yes, why?" "Catherine, you've gone pale. What's wrong?" But she couldn't answer because suddenly everything clicked into place. The title that had been nagging at her mind, the sense that something important was still to come. The Footman was real to her until she saw the ring and everything collapsed. This was it. This was the moment that would test everything. "Where is the ring now?" she asked carefully. "Mother has it. She's been carrying it around in her purse for days, showing it to everyone, quite pleased with herself." He frowned. "Catherine, what's this about?" She stood up, her mind racing. "Richard, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. If we call off this engagement, will it cause problems for you and Charles? Will your parents pressure you into another arrangement, another society marriage?" He was quiet for a moment. "Probably. My father's very invested in maintaining appearances. If this falls through, he'll likely find another suitable bride within months. Then we need to be strategic about how we do this. We need to make it look like I'm the one who's unsuitable, not you. Take the blame publicly, so your parents don't immediately try to marry you off to someone else. Catherine, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering, because you deserve the chance to live your life with Charles. Just like I deserve the chance to be with Thomas, but we have to do this carefully." They spent the next hour planning their strategy. They would tell their families that Catherine had fallen in love with someone else, Thomas Hartwell, the newly discovered heir to the Hartwell fortune. Richard would play the part of the betrayed gentleman, wounded but too dignified to make a scene. The Pembertons would save face by appearing to be the wronged party, which would buy Richard time before his parents started arranging another match. That evening at dinner, with both families present, Catherine stood up before dessert was served. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I need to make an announcement before tomorrow's planned event," she said. "Richard, I'm so sorry, but I can't marry you. I've fallen in love with someone else." The room erupted. Her mother gasped, dropping her fork with a clatter. Patricia Pemberton's face went white, then red. Her father, who'd been prepared for this, maintained his composure. Richard played his part perfectly, looking appropriately shocked and hurt. "Who?" her mother demanded. "Catherine, who could possibly—" "Thomas Hartwell," Catherine said clearly. "He's been working here, but he's the nephew of Jonathan Hartwell of Philadelphia. He's recently inherited a substantial portion of the Hartwell estate." "Hartwell?" Her mother's expression shifted from outrage to confusion. "The Steele family? But why was he working as a—" "That's not relevant," Catherine's father interrupted. "What matters is that Catherine has made her choice, and I've agreed to respect it, provided young Mr. Hartwell handles this situation appropriately." Patricia Pemberton stood up, her hands gripping the table. "This is outrageous. We've been planning this engagement for months. The invitations for tomorrow have already been sent. The ring—" She fumbled in her purse, pulling out a velvet box. I was going to present this tomorrow night. The Pemberton sapphire, worn by 3 generations of Pemberton brides. She opened the box, and Catherine saw the ring for the first time. It was stunning, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. It was also a cage, a beautiful symbol of a life she didn't want. Mrs. Pemberton, I'm so sorry, Catherine said quietly, but I can't accept that ring. It belongs to someone who will love your son the way he deserves to be loved. That person isn't me. Patricia's hands were shaking as she closed the box. You've humiliated us, humiliated Richard. After everything we've done, all the planning. Mother. Richard stood up, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's all right. Catherine is right. We wouldn't have been happy together. Better to discover that now than after we're married. But the shame of it, Richard, the gossip. What will people say? They'll say that Catherine Ashford fell in love with a Hartwell heir, and that I was gentleman enough to step aside. He looked at Catherine, and she saw gratitude in his eyes. It's not ideal, but it's not a disaster either. The Hartwells are a respected family. This isn't a scandal. It's just a change of plans. Eleanor Ashford was less forgiving. As the Pembertons left, Patricia still clutching the velvet ring box, Richard offering Catherine a small, supportive nod, her mother turned on her with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Pembertons will never forgive this slight. We'll be the talk of every drawing room from here to Newport. And for what? A man who was working as a servant in our house? Catherine, have you lost your mind? Eleanor. Her father's voice was sharp. That's enough. Catherine has made her decision. Thomas Hartwell is from a good family, and he has the means to provide for her. That's all that matters. All that matters. Harrison, our daughter, just threw away the match of the season for love, Catherine interrupted. I threw it away for love, Mother. Something you might not understand, but something I refuse to live without. Her mother stared at her, and Catherine saw something crack in her carefully maintained facade. You think I don't understand love? You think I've never... She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. You're so young, Catherine, so naive. You think love is enough, but it isn't. It never is. Maybe it wasn't enough for you, Catherine said gently, but I'm going to find out for myself. She left the dining room and went straight to the carriage house, not caring any more who saw her. She found Thomas in his room, pacing anxiously. He turned when she entered, his expression full of questions. It's done, she said. I broke the engagement, told them about you, about the inheritance. Richard was gracious about it. My father supports us. My mother is furious, but she'll come around eventually. And the Pembertons? They'll recover. Richard's going to be fine. She crossed to him, taking his hands. Thomas, we can do this. We can actually build a life together. It won't be easy. There will be gossip and judgment, and people who never let us forget how we started. But it will be real. It will be ours. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I contacted the lawyers this afternoon before dinner, told them I'm accepting the inheritance. They said it'll take about 3 weeks to finalize all the paperwork and transfer the funds. After that, I'll be Thomas Coleman Hartwell officially, the heir to a fortune I never wanted. And we'll figure out how to use it for good. Together. Together, he repeated, and kissed her softly. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of change and adjustment. Thomas moved out of the servants' quarters and into a suite of rooms in the main house, a temporary arrangement while he established himself in Philadelphia. The staff treated him with a confused mixture of deference and familiarity, unsure how to relate to someone who'd been their colleague and was now their employer's future son-in-law. The gossip was brutal, as Catherine had expected. The society pages hummed with speculation about the Ashford girl who broke her engagement to a Pemberton for a servant-turned-heir. Some were scandalized, others found it romantic, most just enjoyed having something to talk about. Catherine held her head high through it all, attending charity events with her mother and enduring the whispered comments and pointed questions. Eleanor Ashford remained coldly polite, making it clear she considered Catherine's choice a betrayal of everything the family stood for. But her father kept his word, standing by her decision and treating Thomas with measured respect. The turning point came when Thomas received the final inheritance paperwork. The amount was staggering, enough to live comfortably for several lifetimes. But true to his word, Thomas immediately established a foundation in his father's name, dedicating half the inheritance to workers' education and safety initiatives. The announcement made headlines, and suddenly the gossip shifted. Thomas Hartwell wasn't just a romantic figure. He was a philanthropist, a progressive, someone using his privilege to create change. Eleanor Ashford read the newspaper article about the foundation over breakfast one morning, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked at Catherine across the table. "He's serious about this, isn't he? Using the money for workers' causes." "He is. It's what his father would have wanted." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "My father, your grandfather, started as a clerk in a shipping office, worked his way up through sheer determination and strategic marriages. He never forgot where he came from, but he also never talked about it. Pretended he'd always been wealthy, always been one of them." She set down the newspaper. "Maybe your Thomas is smarter than all of us. Maybe remembering where you came from is the only way to stay human when you have that much money." It wasn't an apology or an endorsement, but it was a thaw. Catherine would take it. On a cold morning in early December, Thomas came to Ashford Manor in a new suit, carrying flowers, and formally asked Harrison Ashford for permission to court his daughter. Her father agreed, with the stipulation that the courtship be conducted properly. Chaperoned outings, appropriate timing, everything done to restore the family's reputation after the broken engagement. Thomas agreed to all of it. And so began the strangest period of Catherine's life, being formally courted by the man she'd been secretly in love with for months. They went to concerts and museum exhibitions, always with Mrs. Brennan or Catherine's aunt as chaperone. They had dinner with both families, navigating the awkward dynamics of Eleanor's disapproval and Thomas's determination to win her over. They talked about their future, what kind of life they wanted to build, how to balance Thomas's philanthropy with the social expectations they'd never fully escape. It was slower than their greenhouse meetings had been, more constrained, but it was also real, sustainable, built on a foundation that could actually support them. 3 months after the broken engagement, on a February evening when snow was falling softly over the Hudson Valley, Thomas took Catherine to the greenhouse where they'd first confessed their love. Mrs. Brennan waited discreetly outside, giving them a moment of privacy. "I wanted to do this here," Thomas said, pulling a small box from his pocket, "where it all started, where we first admitted what we felt." Catherine's heart was pounding as he opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing like the elaborate Pemberton sapphire. It was modest, honest, perfect. "Catherine Ashford, will you marry me? Not because our families expect it, not because it's appropriate or strategic, but because I love you, because you make me want to be better than I am, because I can't imagine building the future without you." "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, a symbol not of obligation but of choice, of two people who'd found each other across the impossible divide of class and circumstance, and decided that love was worth fighting for. They married that spring in a small ceremony at the estate, with only close family and friends present. Richard Pemberton attended with Charles, introducing him as his business partner, and Catherine saw the hope in Richard's eyes. Hope that maybe, someday, he could have what she and Thomas had found. Vanessa served as one of Catherine's bridesmaids, wearing a suit instead of a dress and scandalizing half the guests. Eleanor Ashford cried during the ceremony, and Catherine couldn't tell if they were tears of loss or acceptance or some complicated mixture of both. But when her mother hugged her afterward, she whispered, "Be happy, Catherine. That's all I ever wanted for you, even if I didn't know how to say it." Thomas and Catherine moved to Philadelphia, into a modest brownstone in the city rather than one of the Hartwell family mansions. They used the inheritance to expand the Workers' Foundation, funding schools and safety programs across Pennsylvania. Catherine enrolled in architecture classes at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the few schools that accepted women in the program, and discovered she had a talent for designing affordable housing. Their life wasn't perfect. They still faced judgment from some corners of society, still had to navigate the complicated dynamics of wealth and responsibility. Thomas struggled sometimes with the weight of his family name, and Catherine occasionally missed the simplicity of their greenhouse meetings. But they built something real together, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of love that grows deeper with time rather than fading. 5 years later, Catherine stood in the greenhouse at Ashford Manor. She and Thomas visited often, and her relationship with her mother had slowly healed into something approaching friendship. She was holding their daughter, Eleanor Catherine Hartwell, named for both grandmothers. The baby reached for the jasmine flowers, and Thomas gently redirected her tiny hands. "She has your curiosity," he said, smiling. "And your stubbornness," Catherine replied. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, older now, but still managing the household with quiet efficiency. "Your mother's asking for you, Mrs. Hartwell. Something about plans for Eleanor's christening party." Catherine handed the baby to Thomas and followed Mrs. Brennan back toward the house. As they walked, the housekeeper said quietly, "You did well, Miss Catherine. Both of you. You proved an old woman wrong about what's possible when people refuse to accept the limitations they're given." "You helped us," Catherine said. "All those warnings, all that honesty about what we'd face. It prepared us, made us stronger. Well, someone had to keep you grounded in reality while you were busy being romantic." But Mrs. Brennan smiled as she said it. Inside the house, Eleanor Ashford was indeed planning an elaborate christening party, her organizational skills now channeled into being a devoted grandmother. She looked up when Catherine entered, and her face softened. "There you are, darling. I was thinking white roses for the church, and perhaps a small reception here at the estate. Nothing too ostentatious. We don't want to overwhelm little Eleanor." "That sounds perfect, Mother." Eleanor paused, then said, "You know, I was wrong. About so many things. About what you needed, what would make you happy. I'm glad you didn't listen to me. You were trying to protect me, the only way you knew how. Perhaps. But you found a better way. You and Thomas. You're building something I never had the courage to build with your father. And watching you, seeing the way you look at each other even after 5 years, it gives me hope that the world is changing, slowly but changing." Catherine hugged her mother, feeling the walls that had stood between them for so long finally crumbling. Outside, through the window, she could see Thomas walking with baby Eleanor through the garden, showing her the bare winter branches that would bloom again in spring. The gardener, one of the men Thomas had promoted to head groundskeeper, with a generous salary and benefits from the foundation, waved as they passed. This was her life now. Not the one she'd been raised to expect, not the comfortable cage of the Pemberton match, but a life built on choice and courage, and the stubborn belief that love, combined with action and principle, could actually be enough. That night, back in their Philadelphia brownstone, Catherine and Thomas sat in their small study, reviewing applications for the Foundation's new scholarship program. Eleanor slept peacefully in her nursery down the hall. The house smelled of the jasmine Thomas had planted in their greenhouse, a reminder of where they'd started. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Giving up the life you could have had? The ease of it, the certainty?" Catherine looked around their modest but comfortable home, thought about her architecture studies and the housing projects she was helping design, thought about their daughter who would grow up seeing her parents work together as equals, thought about the real intimacy they'd built through struggle and choice. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This life, the one we built ourselves, is worth more than any life that was handed to me could ever be." Thomas smiled and pulled her close. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the city in quiet white. But inside, in the home they'd created, in the future, they were building one difficult choice at a time. Everything was warm and real and theirs. The ring that had almost trapped Catherine, the Pemberton sapphire representing a life of beautiful imprisonment, remained in its velvet box, eventually passed to another Pemberton bride who would face her own choices. But the simple gold band Catherine wore, the one Thomas had offered her in a greenhouse surrounded by jasmine and possibility, that ring told a different story. A story about two people who refused to accept the limitations their world tried to impose. Who fought for the right to build something real, something honest, something that honored both their values and their love. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not the scandal or the gossip or the obstacles they'd overcome, but the life they'd chosen to live together. Real, complicated, imperfect, and absolutely worth fighting for.